Session 84, we're going to be multiplying square roots together. And as was mentioned earlier in the previous session, when you have one radical, one square root being multiplied by another one, you can simply take the two terms that are inside, multiply those together, and take the square root of the product of those two. So what does that mean? Well, the square root of x times the square root of y is the same thing as the square root of x times y. Let's drop down here to an example. Radical 2 times radical 18. Let's simplify that. Well, using our expression up here of radical x times radical y equaling radical x times y, let's rewrite this. We're going to write a square root sign here, a radical, and then we're going to take the 2 times the 18. 2 times 18 is 36. However, we're not finished because radical 36 simplifies even further. What is the square root of 36? Well, 36 is a square. It's the square of 6. So 6 is the answer to this problem. Radical 2 times radical 18 is 6. Let's take a look at another problem here. Here we have radical 3 being multiplied by the expression radical 12 plus radical 24. Well, let's go ahead and use our distributive property and distribute this through. We're going to take the radical 3 times the radical 12. That's the same thing as taking 3 times 12 and sticking that inside the radical sign. Well, 3 times 12 is 36. So radical 3 times radical 12 is radical 36. Next, we're going to be adding to it radical 3 times radical 24. Well, 3 times 24 is 72. So the square root of 3 times the square root of 24 is the same thing as the square root of 72. Now, we can in fact simplify this even further. 36 is a square, so what is the square root of 36? 6. Next, what we have to do is ask ourselves, does 72 have any factors in it that are squares? In fact, it does. It has 36 times 2. So we could rewrite this as 6 plus the square root of 36 times 2. And remember, we can now break that apart even further. 6 plus, I'm just rewriting the 6. This is the same thing as the square root of 36 times the square root of 2. And what we are then left with in our final stage here is going to be 6 plus, I'm just rewriting that. What is the square root of 36? Well, that's 6. And that's being multiplied by radical 2, which cannot reduce any further. Radical 3 times parentheses radical 12 plus radical 24 in its simplified form is 6 plus 6 radical 2. Let's take a look at one more here. Radical 2 times radical x plus 1 in parentheses multiplied by 3 radical x plus 3 in parentheses. What does that equal in its simplified form? Well, we're going to go ahead and use our distributive property once again. We're going to take this term here, our 2 radical x, this monomial, and we're going to multiply it by each of our 2 terms over here. Well, 2 radical x times 3 radical x. 2 times 3 is 6. Radical x times radical x is x. So 2 radical x times 3 radical x is 6x. Now we're going to take our 2 radical x here and multiply it by our positive 3. So that's going to give us a 6 radical x, and that's because 2 times 3 is 6. So that takes care of our first term. We've distributed it through. Let's take our second term and distribute it. 1 times radical 3x, or excuse me, 1 times 3 radical x is simply 3 radical x. And then lastly, 1 times positive 3 is positive 3. Now let's go ahead and combine like terms. Do we have any other terms that have an x to the first degree? No, we don't. So we're going to rewrite that as 6x. There's nothing else to combine it with. Now, Our second term here has x to the 1/2, and our third term also has x to the 1/2. So they have the same base. Therefore, we can add our coefficients together. 6 radical x plus 3 radical x is 9 radical x. And that's because 6 plus 3, 6 and 3 being our coefficients, is 9. And so that takes care of terms 2 and 3. And then the third term, or the last term, the fourth term, is just the 3, all by itself. Now, we can actually take this one step further. Each of our 3 terms here has a common factor. The common factor is 3. So let's go ahead and bring a 3 out front. 3 times what is 6x? Well, 3 times 2x is 6x. 3 times what is 9 radical x? Well, 3 times 3 radical x is 9 radical x. And then 3 times 1 is 3. So by bringing a 3 out of each of these terms here, that then leaves us with 3 parentheses 2x plus 3 radical x plus 1. This here is the simplified format of 2 radical x plus 1 being multiplied by 3 radical x plus 3. And then lastly, as the review point of this session, radical x times radical y is the same thing as radical x times y. That'll wrap up session 84.